What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Max Manus Pod. So excited, as always, to bring you guys today's episode. Today's guest is someone who I said this to him probably about 10 different times throughout the course of the episode, but this guest is someone who I truly grew up on. For as long as I can remember, dating back probably to like third or fourth grade, getting home from school every single day. I don't think I would have even taken off my jacket and like putting my backpack down before I turned on MLB Network to check out Intentional Talk and see what Chris Rose and Kevin Millar were talking about. They were such an integral part of my childhood that a few years back when I was moving apartments, I was going through like a whole bunch of old schoolwork and papers and like notebooks to see if there was anything worth keeping. And I found that when I was like 10 years old, I wrote some paper for school about how I wanted to have a Chris Rose and Kevin Millar Intentional Talk themed birthday party. So if that doesn't get me in the club as a true OG Chris Rose fan, then I don't know what will. But yeah, Chris Rose is awesome. He is someone who he and I are actually both coming up on our 5-year anniversaries of working at Jomboy Media. He started, I think, like a week and a half after I did. And I remember not to say I wasn't already pumped to be working for Jomboy Media, but to find that out a week and a half later, I remember just sitting there having this real like, holy crap moment of like, I am going to get to call Chris Rose a coworker. Like he's going to be someone that I can like see and talk to and like talk baseball with. And that really is just as cool to me now as it was 5 years ago. Really appreciated Rosie giving me a good amount of his time. We talked a whole lot of Jomboy Media stuff right now. Obviously, we talked kind of about the role that he sees himself playing in the baseball media world, where I've always been impressed that he's somebody that has like a really fun, jovial, like almost silly side to himself, but also like, can have real serious conversations. And I've always, dating back to all those years watching Intentional Talk, I always like felt like I walked away having learned something from him and not just smiling and having a good time. And in a media industry where a lot of people are kind of one way or the other with that, it's always impressed me how Rose is able to strike that balance. So we talked a lot about that. We talked about how the work he does now at Jomboy Media kind of compares and contrasts to the Intentional Talk days. And we talked about kind of just the state of baseball media as a whole. And, Chris Rose watched a lot of baseball over the years. So there's a whole lot of good insight. I do also want to do a whole bunch more episodes with more Jomboy Media personalities, either before the season starts or maybe even after the season starts. So if there's anybody you guys want to see, the Jake episode did great. I'm hoping you guys enjoy this one as well. Anybody else that comes to mind that you want to see, drop a comment below. I'll give it a read. I'll see what I can do. You guys are the best. Really appreciate you checking out the episode as always. And without further ado, let's get into the episode. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Max Manus Pod. Today's guest is somebody that I can confidently say for myself, but I can with near certainty also say for a full generation of baseball fans around my age. This was the guy that we grew up on. This was the guy that every single day when I got home and needed my MLB rundown for the past 24 hours, this man was the one delivering it to me, and it's still to this day just so cool that I get to call him a coworker. Chris Rose, what's going on?
Hello, Max. How are you?
I can't complain. I'm sitting here talking to the guy that was the soundtrack of every single day when I got home from my childhood. So it's hard to complain about anything.
Yeah, we call that bad parenting. If that's what your parents were letting you do back then. But I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. I have heard that from more than just yourself, so I'm greatly appreciative of it still.
I'm sure. All these years later, somehow it turned into a career in baseball. So I think one way or another it worked out. Rosie, I will start you off with the question that I like to start off all my guests with. Chris Rose, why do you love baseball?
It's interesting because my team sucked when I was growing up, so I really had to love it in order to stay with it, I think, the way that I have. The first 23 years of my life, the then Cleveland Indians did not finish higher than fourth in their division. Now, this is back when there were only two divisions, right? There was the American League East and the American League West, and so we were in there with a bunch of powerhouses, during the 70s, certainly the late 70s. It was New York, it was Boston. Then in the 80s, it was Detroit, Toronto, things of that nature. And so you figured that at some point we were just going to like slip into a third place finish, and that did not happen. I remember the summer of 89, I was a freshman at Michigan, and I was starting like a summer course early there. And back then, I think NBC had the Saturday games, and heading into August, the Indians were like 3 games out and had a huge Saturday game against Boston, and I was so fired up. And then they just went south so hard the rest of the year and didn't finish. Like I said, they finished maybe 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. Yes, there were 7 teams back then in a division. But it was tough. I mean, I loved players. I loved going to old Cleveland Municipal Stadium, which was actually built and opened, I think, in 1929 because they were chasing an Olympic bid, and so it was this huge, cavernous, not fit for baseball stadium. But I loved going around, and even if there were only 4,000 fans at the game, it was fun for me because I would walk around and sit in different parts of the ballpark to learn about how to watch baseball from behind home plate, from down one of the foul lines, from the outfield, all sorts of stuff. And I don't know. I just loved. It didn't matter that the Indians weren't winning. I couldn't wait for opening day. I couldn't wait to listen to the games on the radio, which we had to do back then because they were only on TV 2 or 3 times a week. And it was just something that it's not like my dad took me a ton. He took me to a few games, but I went with buddies and friends and my brother, and I still love it to this day.
Yeah, I think it's always so cool to me to see people who stick around in baseball for decades and decades. And a lot of people get like really pissy about it. And like, I would be lying if I said I didn't get it a little bit when it's like a freezing Tuesday night in April in Kansas City. And it's like, man, we got to do this again. But people like you, your passion always is kind of just the driving force and always shines so brightly. And I don't think that's something that can really be learned later in life. I think it's got to come from an early age. So can you kind of give the people, I guess, your lifelong baseball journey from those early days at Municipal Stadium to MLB Network, Jomboy Media, and kind of everywhere in between?
Well, my first job out of college, a week after I graduated, I was running studio camera for the ABC affiliate in Cincinnati, and so I didn't really have a connection to the sports world. I would talk with sports reporters and sports anchors in that building, and they kind of helped me because I knew I wanted to be on TV, but that felt so far away at that point. 5 months later, the Fox affiliate in town was starting a newscast. This is the fall of '93, and so they needed help. I was originally hired as just a production assistant, so I was running like prompter and ripping scripts and stuff like that. And they knew they needed help in the sports department pretty quickly, and so I was like, "How you doing?" So that was me, and I got hired there and started covering the Reds back then on a daily basis. And, you know, they were just a couple years removed from their 1990 World Series championship team. Barry Larkin was still the face of the Cincinnati Reds. They still had a really, really good team when I started covering them, and that was a lot of fun, except for the strike of '94, which sucked. That was horrible. I still remember it to this day, what it was like when the baseball world stopped. We eventually got back, and that's really when my baseball work life combined with something that was super exciting as just a fan. That's when the Indians started taking off. They opened what was then Jacobs Field in 1994, and I remember going there for the first time. Let me see if I still have that picture. This is the first time I ever visited Jacobs Field. So this is 1994 with my brother, who is named Pete Rose, of course.
There you go.
And it was a game, I believe, against the Rangers. And we walked in there, and we wanted to get there like an hour and a half early just to look at the place because Cleveland Municipal Stadium, as many childhood memories as I had, it wasn't a thing of beauty. This place was. And then you timed it up perfectly with this young, up-and-coming team, and it was something special. It really was incredible. Then they went to the World Series the next year, which was out of this charts amazing. And that's what it coincided with me getting my first full-time on-air job in Reno, Nevada. And in fact, the Indians, this is how screwed up baseball was. They didn't have every game broadcast. Every playoff game was not being broadcast out in Reno, Nevada. They were splitting the West Coast feed, and so I couldn't get the Indians Red Sox, the first ever playoff game that I'm trying to witness.
Yeah.
I couldn't watch it. I couldn't watch it.
Jeez. Brutal.
And so my dad who was a great baseball fan and was actually friendly with a bunch of the Indians that won the 1948 World Series. I mean, he used to hang out with those guys. They were all the same age. Was trying to give me play-by-play of what was happening. And so we got to like the 13th or 14th inning. It was a tie game, and Tony Pena took Zane Smith deep. And all he says is, "Oh, my God. Oh, my God." I'm like, "Dad, what happened? What happened?" He's like, "Home run. Home run." So that's how I found out. I couldn't even see it. I had to wait for the Sports Center highlights for my first ever playoff game. I mean, I know it's laughable in today's age where we can watch every game right here on our phones. So, eventually I moved from Reno to CNN. And then when I got out to Fox and Best Damn Sports Show, period, we started covering baseball much more frequently because it was a major Fox property. That's actually where I became friendly with Kevin Millar because his first year in Boston in 2003, he started doing segments for us. He came on the show and we're like, "My God, this guy is a clown." And I meant it in the best way possible. But he started doing segments with us every few weeks. It was like called Millar's Time. Very creative, by the way. And so he would join us and we would have a blast. And he and I are roughly the same age. And his mom lived 10 minutes from me out here. So we would see each other in the off seasons. And I always remember telling him, I said, "Listen, you're great at this TV stuff. One day when you're done, when somebody's smart enough to tell you can't play baseball anymore, let's do something together." And so we dreamt about it, and we eventually did.
Yeah, lo and behold, I think it's always so interesting to me to kind of compare and contrast intentional talk to like what we're doing now at Jomboy Media, because intentional talk, to me at least, represented like in a day and age where, when I was growing up, all I would ever hear was, "Oh, kids don't like baseball. It's too slow. It's not fun. The players are taking 2 minutes to, scratch their jock straps and, get around the bases. Like, why do you like baseball as a kid?" But I kind of had that same, like, childlike wonder that, "Oh my God, you walk into the stadium and there's the green grass everywhere, and learning how to keep score and all those things are just like such an integral part of my childhood." And lo and behold, all these years later, Jomboy Media is kind of like, intentional talk times 1,000 of like, let's make baseball really fun and show the world how cool baseball is. And no, it's not just a bunch of, crotchety old men standing around complaining all the time. Like there's something really not only beautiful, but like fun and energetic and that kids can enjoy about this. So when you think about the coverage that you were doing at MLB Network, Intentional Talk, compared to what you're doing now for Jomboy Media, are there similarities and differences that I guess people may not even realize?
No, I think they realize them. I mean, look, I've always called myself a producer that happens to be on air, and that has helped me a lot with Jomboy Media. There are some people, and I'm not here throwing darts, but there are some on-air people who wouldn't know exactly what to do in the streaming world or how to come up with ideas. And I think that has benefited me. The Intentional Talk experience, the Best Damn Sports Show experience, both of those they were entertainment-driven shows. They're not, we could talk serious topics when we needed to, but it's not our specialty, and it's not when the show is best. It's when you're having fun. It's when there's a lighter side of things. And I think that we've tried to continue that with whether it was Rose Rotation or now dugout discussions, and certainly with baseball today. So there are always going to be similarities as long as I'm putting content out there. It's important to try and evolve to the best of my ability. Look, I'm 30 plus years older than some of my coworkers, maybe even one that I'm talking
Wonder who.
to. Right. So, and that's okay. There's still, I think there's an important perspective to have from people who have been around the game a bit and can teach some of, well, this is where the game has come from to today. I am far from one of those old heads who is strictly all about, well, that's not how it was done back then, so it's no good. I mean, I'm the exact opposite. In fact, I want to try and push it even a little bit more than some of the traditionalists and some of the younger people who would maybe consider themselves some traditionalists. So I think the thing I've realized more than anything, having joined Jomboy Media at the beginning of 2021, is that there's space for everybody. And I don't think that people should say, well, those people on TV don't know what they're talking about. They have no idea what they're doing. It's just a different way of looking at it. And that's okay. I mean, I don't want a world where everybody sees stuff the same. I just don't. And so when there's new people that are popping up in the streaming world and are offering something new and exciting and different, go for it. That's awesome. It doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to watch it or that it resonates with me, but if you can find your audience, that's great. I mean, that is a win for you as a content creator, and most importantly for the sport, which I applaud Major League Baseball, because I can tell you this, about 10 years ago, I tried to start a podcast with Kevin, and they were vehemently against it. They were like, you can do it, but we're not really going to help you. Like, go ahead, try and book your guests. And now they can't get enough of podcasts, whether it's having a working relationship with us or trying to put out some of their own original content. That finally somebody woke them up in one of their meetings and was like, hey, we've got to get on this. And if we don't, we're going to fall massively behind.
Yeah, it's definitely been the last 3 to 5 years have just been such a fascinating, I think, cultural shift as a whole, but especially within the baseball world. And I think I catch myself explaining this a lot to people when friends of mine or people that I meet will try to kind of compare and contrast Jomboy to traditional journalism and be like, oh, you guys are kind of replaced. And I always say we're not trying to be journalists. We're not trying to take anyone's jobs. Jimmy and Jake have always been very upfront. We are Yankees fans. We are telling you that. Don't judge us on the same basis that you judge the other people on. We're not trying to be impartial. We're going to give you reasonable, nuanced, thought out takes. We still know ball. We're not just, angry fists screaming at the sky all day. But we're not trying to do what those other people are doing. And I think where bringing someone like you in as a more established voice who's kind of been around the block a couple times was really helpful, is that you've always really impressed me in that in the media world, there are so many people that are either so far on the end of the spectrum of either I'm super entertaining and super personable and super lively and super outrageous, or, I know ball and I'm super informative and my calling card is I'm going to show you how much ball I know. And it's really hard to be able to strike that balance of we can have fun with the players and, be silly, goofy and have the fun baseball conversations, but also educate our audience about that and, have a respect for the listener that it's no, we want you to come away from our program being informed, learning something new that you didn't know beforehand, hopefully having a different viewpoint on things than you did coming in. So how do you strike that balance between wanting to maintain that really fun, really outgoing, personable side of yourself, but also at the end of the day, we are trying to be informative and educational to people?
Well, first of all, I'm going to go back and give you a little pushback on the whole journalism thing. I do think that it's still important to have journalistic integrity. And what I mean by that is that people hear the word journalist, and I think they immediately think negative connotation, and I don't think that that's fair. Number one is when there are sources to credit, you credit them. I actually think our baseball media insiders that are covering the league do an exceptional job of that. So-and-so was first with their coverage. That's being a good journalist, because you just can't take information and make it your own if you didn't come up with it. So that is being a journalist. When you are crediting, if we're having a discussion and I say that Ken Rosenthal wrote this in The Athletic, or Jeff Passan did that, or Joel Sherman in the New York Post did this, that's your basic 101 journalism, and that stuff is important to do. And I don't care whether we're doing it on Baseball Today, dugout discussions, talking Yanks, talking baseball, or anything else that we're putting out there. You don't ever want to make something appear as though it's your own. Your own opinions can be your own opinions. You don't have to credit that. But every morsel of information that you get does have to be credited from somewhere, I do believe.
Yeah, I think that's something we try to keep front of mind all the time. But yeah, continue.
So back to your point, the number one thing that I tell young people who want to get in a content creation or, get into the linear world or any other stream is stay true to who you are. And I should be talking to some people in our industry about that too, because yelling and screaming does get paid. It really does. That doesn't mean that everybody can, because you'll see all these different programs that want to kick and scream about this and that and the other, and they think that they're going to turn into the next Stephen A. The reality is that's not going to happen, most likely. Really. Now, I do think that, unfortunately, a lot of the decision makers have dumbed themselves down. I'm not calling them dumb, but I'm saying that they have dumbed it down to the point where they see that works with Stephen A., so it's got to work with everybody else. And I don't think so. I think that you've got to land where you're comfortable. I always live by the credo that at the end of the day, I've got to be able to put my head on the pillow and feel good about who I am and what I've represented at the end of the day. And there are times where I have felt crappy about things that I have said. I always adhere to this rule, is that I try not to make it personal. There have been a handful of times in my career, whether it's been on Intentional Talk or Best Damn Sports Show, period, which have been opinionated shows, or now with Baseball Today in particular, where maybe I have overstepped the lines. But those are very rare occasions, and they're usually because somebody has done something illegal. And then I don't really have a problem with it. I remember that when the Astros traded for Roberto Osuna, right? The reliever from Toronto who had some domestic violence issues. And at the time, and I can't even remember exactly how it played out, but at the time, I was livid with the Astros, saying that they were trying to take advantage of a situation where somebody did something horrific and knew that Toronto wanted to get rid of him. Just knew it. And I blasted Houston, and I still don't have a problem with it to this day. I just don't. So I always feel like you have to be careful with that. Some people don't care at all. I mean, you can turn on whatever network, you know where they are. You know where to find these shows or that are streaming, and they will make it personal, and they don't care, and they will say whatever they want. I mean, I'll jump to a different sport. The amount of hate that my former NFL head coach, Kevin Stefanski, has received based on how he handled the Shedeur Sanders situation, is gross. It's gross. They might not have liked it that they didn't give him any first-team reps, but some of the venom that has been spewed his direction, I don't know how you could say it. I don't. And it's horrible. I mean, you are taking shots at a guy you've never probably even shaken hands with, might not even have been in the same building with, and you're saying all these horrible, horrible things about him. You can judge him saying, it's ridiculous he didn't give Shedeur any first-team reps. Got it. But then to go the next step, gross. Really, really gross.
Does that, like, kind of maintaining that integrity that you're talking about, does that get tricky when, like, I remember thinking during the Rose rotation days when you would have Lucas Giolito on pretty frequently when he was on the White Sox. I remember, I was younger at the time. So, like, now at this point, I kind of get it that it's like, hey, you still, even if you're buddies with a guy who's on a team that kind of stinks right now, you still kind of gotta, when you hop on Baseball Today, if the conversation is the White Sox, you can't, just try to fluff up the White Sox because Giolito is your buddy. Mm-hmm. But is that ever kind of a tough line to toe, especially when you've gotten to a point where, like, I'm sure at this point there's people and players that in close to, if not every organization across baseball. And yet your job requires you to go out there and you have a national baseball show where you talk about all 30 teams.
Right.
And if you don't touch on all 30 teams and be honest about all of them, people are going to call you out for that and call you a phony. Is that, I guess, how do you keep yourself in check with that?
Well, from my standpoint, athletes, they don't like it when you rip them for not playing well, but they understand it's part of the deal. Like I said, it's when it gets personal or if you speak out of turn and don't know the whole story, I think that's where it rubs them the wrong way. And Tyler Glasnow and I have talked about this all the time. I don't think he's pitched more than 130 innings. I brought it up, I think, the last time we had dugout discussions with him. And he's like, well, do you think I don't want to be out there? Do Dodger fans think I don't want to be out there? Do they think that, like, I'm just good with it? I said, I don't know. You tell me. And he said, no, I'm not good with it. Like, I want to be participating. I want to be earning my contract. Lucas and I have had several conversations about that sort of stuff. And it doesn't mean that I'm talking to them one way. Like when we would do Rose rotation like this, and then the next day I'd be like, well, that guy really sucks. I might say, he's thinking right now. And by the way, when you don't make it out of the fourth inning of your start, you don't need Chris Rose to tell you stink. Like they know it. They've got a pretty good handle on it. So as long as you are speaking facts, like if I say he's got to be better, he has got to improve, or those guys aren't going to be mad. Not once have they said something like that. So I think it's a respect thing. It's an understanding of the multiple hats that I wear here at Jomboy Media, where one time I can be doing an interview show with them and the next day be criticizing them because of how they've participated, not who they are. There's a big difference.
Yeah, you got to call it as you see it. I think Ryan Rucco used to always say that his rule of thumb was, if it's not something that I'm willing to say to someone's face, then I probably shouldn't be saying it. But at the same time, if you're 0 for your last 15, that's bad. And I would tell you to your face that it's bad. And I'm not doing my job if I'm not saying that that's the truth.
Yeah, but Max, there's also an understanding, particularly with this sport, and particularly with guys who are hitting the ball. I mean, there's not one guy who's played this sport who hasn't been, as Kevin used to tell me, in a 2 for 31 slump. And now it's game 5 of a 10-game road trip. And it's 3 a.m. and you're in Minneapolis and you put a pizza box down in front of a full-length mirror and you're sitting there in your underwear with a bat in your hand trying to figure out why you can't hit. So for people that are like, doesn't bother these, it bothers them immensely. This is the most mentally gut-wrenching sport there is. It is so tough. So as long as you have an understanding that guys are going to go through that during the year and just say this is where they're wearing it, man, for these 3 weeks from the middle of June to the beginning of July, the guy looks like he's never played baseball before. I mean, he knows he's in for it. Over a 6-month span, it's coming. So you just have to have that understanding while also being, I think, fair.
Are there certain things, either about interviewing or about just covering baseball as a whole, that have gotten easier or harder now that you've gotten to a point where, like, you're a decade or a couple decades older than a lot of the guys that are playing the sport, as compared to when, like you said, like you and Millar are the same age. So, like, it was easy enough. And, when you're talking to players of that ilk, I don't know, does it make it easier? Does it make it harder? How's it different?
I don't know. I mean, the age gap is just going to get more substantial. I mean, I'm getting older, and the players that are coming up next year are still going to be 21, right? That's not going to change. Yeah. I'll be a year older. And I think the benefit I have is that a little bit like you, a lot of them grew up on intentional talk.
Yeah.
And so that's helpful. There's no question about it. That they'll, Lawrence Butler I didn't know if he knew who I was. He was like, Chris Rose, my God, in the flesh. I was like, oh, okay. Well, I know who you are. You know who I am? Because you're just not sure with young guys. You just don't know. But it is the coolest part of the job. There's no question. The number of guys who come up to me when I'll go out and record an episode, whether it's at Dodger Stadium or Angel Stadium, and come up and say, hey, I used to race home from school and watch your show. Like, that's pretty awesome. It's neat. I mean, does it suck that I've gotten older? Yeah, I still remember this day being the youngest guy when I worked at CNN Sports Illustrated, and Vince Cellini was like, "Hey, Chris," he was one of the guys I grew up watching in Cleveland, Ohio, and then we were co-anchors together at CNN. He'd always walk in and he'd be like, "You want to go get some ice cream? You want to go play some catch?" He'd always tease me about being the youngest guy, and now it is quite the opposite.
Yeah, you blink and you've got 3 decades on Lawrence Butler.
Cool.
Rosie, you've given me a lot of your time, and I really appreciate it. There's one last question I want to ask you. For me, you were one of the people who, at a very young age, I was able to kind of look at and realize, like, there are jobs that exist in the world that I can achieve to have one day that I don't think I would really ever want to retire from. Like, there are jobs that exist that, like, the thought to me at age 8 being able to be like, I can just grow up and talk about baseball every day, and that's I don't have to like go do some boring desk job with work that I wouldn't want to do. Was that your vision when you started out? Like, did you have this very clear idea of like, hey man, as long as I'm working in sports, I'm always going to love it, and that's going to be something that simply never changes? Or, I guess, how'd that play out?
Yeah, so back when I was growing up, when I was 8, cable TV was really just starting to be the whole rage. And as I mentioned earlier, like, not every Indians game was on Channel 43 serving Lorain and Cleveland. That was the local carrier, but it was like 3 times a week. So all I remember is that on our cable box, we didn't even have a remote control. I would have to go up and manually change it from one channel to another because we had this little cable box that would sit there. And Channel 9 was the Mets channel. It was like WOR, I think. Then Channel 10 was somehow we would get the Expos games out of Montreal. I had no idea. Channel 11 was actually Channel 43. So that's where I watched the Indians games. And then Channel 12 was TBS. So on 4 straight channels, I could just go like this and push it. And there could be 4 baseball games on this. And I was like, oh, I am crushing life. It was incredible. It was absolutely unreal. And I knew that I wanted to do something in sports. And I didn't know exactly what it was until I got into college, where I was driving around the Mid-American Conference. By the way, shout out to the Miami Redhawks, 20-0. Absolutely
Nice.
incredible. But I was driving to places like Bowling Green, Ohio. I was driving to Ball State. I was driving to, OU. I was driving to Toledo. I would drive to Ohio State if we were fortunate enough to have them on the basketball schedule. Indiana, all sorts of places. And I knew I wanted to do something in the sports world. And sure enough, I was fortunate enough to work my way and get some really cool jobs. And, I get to do this every day with Jomboy Media, which is a ton of fun. Is it a lot of work? Yes, it is. And at my work at NFL Network, and then get some interesting jobs kind of off the beaten path, whether it's BattleBots or American Gladiators that's going to be coming out pretty soon. The opportunities I've had are plentiful and greatly appreciated. And I can tell you that probably there are less than 20 days in my 3-decade career where I have not wanted to go to work. And usually that is strictly all about family. And it has almost nothing to do with the work itself. So that means that I have found the right homes, I have covered the right events, and I still have a huge enthusiasm for it. There are some people who fall out of love with it, and there are some people who say, well, you shouldn't be rooting for your teams anymore if you cover the sport. That's your choice. You don't, I would be crushed. My favorite thing to do as far as sports is sit on the couch with our sons, and Michelle has been gracious enough with her mental energy to sit there and become a Cleveland sports fan, even though she grew up in Los Angeles. And we sit there and we root. And there are times where I can see my sons, Josh and Brady, looking at me for just a little bit, wondering why I couldn't have been born in New York or Philadelphia or here in L.A. or somewhere else instead of Cleveland, which has had one championship since I've been alive. One. And I apologize to them, and then we move on.
There you go. Rosie, I think that's the perfect note to finish on. I appreciate you kind of taking us on a trip down memory lane, and I hope that you, especially now that, like we said, baseball, after all those decades of, young people don't like baseball, now that baseball has gotten to a point where it really is booming, I hope that you're able to kind of take a step back and reflect and appreciate the role that you had in that, because to everyone from me to Lawrence Butler to everyone in between, I'm sure that anybody in our age bracket would say that you were an integral part of their childhood and helping them fall in love with the sport that we all love today. So I hope that you're able to appreciate that.
I do. And I appreciate that, Max, a lot. I told you at the beginning, I don't take it lightly. Like, we had something special. The show has continued. I know it's different than when I was there. I'm not saying it's better or it's worse. It's just different because when you are able to build something where it's basically two friends and they just happen to turn on a camera and here we go, that's a rarity. I don't care whether it's in the streaming space or in the linear world or anywhere else, or radio, could be whatever. Sometimes broadcasters or analysts and hosts get put together and they become friends. These were two guys who were friends, and they thought that a show could work, and it was magical. There's no question, and I'm not ashamed to say it. I'm really fortunate that I've had a soft landing here at Jomboy Media, and that Trevor Plouffe is so easy to work with, and he's really bright, and he's passionate, and he's energized, and that's been really fulfilling for me. But at the same time, that is intentional talk's a thing that will always be near and dear to my heart. And that's okay, too. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, I think those statements can all exist at once. And I'm sure that, again, I can speak for my whole generation of baseball fans when I say it makes me so happy that you landed at any place that lets you continue doing what you love, but all the more so that I get to call you a coworker. It is still just something that, blows 8-year-old Max's mind on a daily basis.
Well, that's what we're here for. Until we get a Jomboy Media bobblehead.
I'll talk to the merch team.
Let's go.
We'll get
what are we doing here? We should be able to sell out the Baseball Today. You'd have to get like a split screen, though. I don't know how that would work. You couldn't sit us at a desk like this. You would have to actually put like a divider in between the dudes, and like you can't.
Our designers all creative. They'll figure out a way.
Yeah, this is the best I've looked in a while right here on this desk. That's about it. Max, thank you, bud.